The next speaker is Brian Becker. Brian is the national coordination of the Answer Coalition. He is a co-founder of and a central organizer in the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and is also the host of the Socialist Program on Breakthrough News. So Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika. And I want to thank all of the other speakers and contributors and panelists who have joined us today on this very, very important anniversary. We have to remember the more important moments in our own history, in the history of socialism and communism and Marxism, and certainly the publication of the Manifesto is one of them. I think maybe I won't try to repeat what other speakers have said. And I want to address myself, in fact, to the people who are new to communism and maybe new to the Manifesto and new such that they've never read the Manifesto. And I'm hoping that there's some part of our audience that's part of that category of people. I want to say that communists read the Communist Manifesto in a way that's far different than, say, the way Christians read the Bible or Muslims read the Quran. We Marxists don't approach Marxist texts as the word, as the final word, as a word fixed in stone, as those who are reading religious texts might do so. In fact, in order to understand Marxism and in order to understand the works of Marxism, at least perhaps with the exception of Capital, it's very, very important for the reader to understand the historical moment in which the text is written, the historical context for the text. And we must read the Communist Manifesto as a historical document, not as a religious tract, but as a historical document. And as such, elements of the Manifesto later by Marxists who subscribe to the basic tenets and principles of the Manifesto would certainly amend parts of the descriptions offered by Marx and Engels in the Manifesto. And Marx and Engels did that themselves. The prefaces are very important to read. The preface of 1872, after the experience of the Paris Commune, Marx and Engels both say that the experience of the working class in Paris, the creation of the first worker state, informs the movement about something that the Manifesto could not yet teach the movement, which was how would the working class actually recreate, reorganize society. And Marx and Engels in the 1872 preface say that we learn from the experience of the commune that the working class cannot lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and use it for its own purposes, that the state must be smashed and a new state based on a new class power erected. That's extremely important for the readers of the Manifesto, because the Manifesto says the new society will be created by the exercise of political supremacy by the proletariat, as opposed to the bourgeoisie or the old landowning classes, the nobility. But how that will happen is not described, because there's no experience on which the Manifesto writers, Marx and Engels, could actually premise their conclusion. The theory of Marxism has to be understood as the experiences of the working class and of the class struggle in its complete complexity, then generalized. In other words, not a pie in the sky, not utopian schemes, but based and premised on the experiences of the working class. The Manifesto in 1848 says a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. But by 1852, after the defeat of the 1848 revolution and the Cologne trial of 1852, where all of the people in the Communist League are put on trial, those who are available to be arrested and sent to the fortress, it appears as if the specter has been sort of extinguished in Europe. There is no communism. Communism is gone. And yet it slowly comes back to the surface. And in 1864, when Marx helps form the First International, the International is formed based on the needs of the working class in 1864, but politically at a much lower level than that which was prescribed in the Manifesto in 1848. My point is that the document itself is impacted by the class struggle. The experiences of the class struggle have to then be generalized or regeneralized so that there can be amendments made to these basic Marxist texts. And whenever there's a counter-revolutionary advance, whenever the working class and progressive forces are pushed back, the Manifesto seems to be extinguished. And after the defeat of the Paris Commune, the socialist parties start in Europe in particular. The Manifesto starts to become popular again. In 1917, when the Russian Revolution, as other speakers have mentioned, succeeds and the working class not only takes power, but retains state power and starts the path of reconstructing socialism and proclaims that it's not only fighting for itself, but for the liberation of the colonies and the semi-colonies and the people who were the principal targets and victims of imperialism, the Communist Manifesto evolves from a document that's read by the workers of Europe to the workers in Asia and the workers in Africa and the workers in the Middle East. Communism becomes a global idea of liberation. And after the Russian Revolution has allies created by the extension of revolution after World War II, where you have the People's Republic of China and DPRK and North Vietnam, not to mention the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, the Manifesto is truly a global document. And then there's the counter-revolution that overthrows the Soviet Union and the socialist camp in 1991, and the bourgeoisie proclaims the end of history, and no one cares about the Manifesto. And here we are 30 years later, as the revolutionary movement, the working class movement, the progressive movement, the anti-imperialist movement revives. Again, the interest in the Communist Manifesto takes off. In where I am in the United States, in our party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, tens of thousands of young, mostly young people have applied to join our party just in the last few years. When we started the party in 2004, we were a handful. And 10 years later, we were still a handful. But now there is a mass interest in socialism. For Frank Chapman said it well, there was Occupy movement after the economic meltdown on Wall Street in 2008 and 9, the Black liberation reemergence through the Black Lives Matter in 2014, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, in spite of all of the contradictions and complexities of who Sanders is. And then the uprising against racism in 2020, there's this huge revival in socialism and interest in communism, and now the Manifesto is popular once again. And so we read the document as a historical document. How would we amend the document? Well, for one, the Manifesto has a Europe-centric, not a Eurocentric, but a focus on Europe, on the class struggle in Europe in 1848. There is the colonial struggle, which really becomes paramount and dominant later. Marx said that the class contradictions are breaking down into the collision between two basic class camps, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. I think we would amend that. The peasantry, of course, is still a massive, in terms of population on the globe, the peasantry, huge part of the global population. And to some extent in the metropoles within the United States and perhaps Europe, which I'm less familiar with, the middle class, the petty bourgeoisie certainly has been stimulated and continues to exist as a major force in politics. So I would say that we would have to do some additional scientific investigation on class formations. But in general, the most important part of the Manifesto is the idea that as all of history, as Marx and Engels opened the Manifesto, at least since the end of primary communism, since the beginning of class society, all of that history is the history of class struggle, and that socialism and the better world that is possible and can be made to happen will come about not by the utopian schemes of philosophers, but by the class struggle of the exploited and oppressed themselves. That's the most important lesson, the opening of the manifesto. And we believe in that 100%. And we believe that the contradictions of capitalism that are not going away simply because of the emergence of unipolar power in 1991, the problems of global war, which is accelerating the problem of climate catastrophe, the issue of AI and technology within the confines of capitalist property relations will lead to revolutionary crisis and are, in fact. Finally, on March 18th, on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, we are mobilizing here in the United States and in Washington, D.C. and in other cities for what we hope will be a major protest. The protest will be against imperialism, against the war, the proxy war against Russia, against the developing war drive against the People's Republic of China, against the sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba, against the constant funding of the Israeli racist apartheid state's war against the Palestinian people. In other words, we are trying to show that the class struggle isn't simply the struggle for better wages and better benefits, for better jobs and better working conditions, for better homes. All of that is so critically important, but it's also the struggle for international solidarity against war and for peace, which means to oppose the biggest danger, the biggest purveyor of violence in the world, as Dr. Martin Luther King said in 1967. And that, of course, is US imperialism, the leader of the global camp of capitalists. So the class struggle goes on, it takes different forms. It includes, most importantly, the idea of international solidarity, that we indeed have something in common with each other, opposition to imperialism and capitalism, and socialism represents the prospect, the possibility that we can build together a new world. Thanks so much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.